Hello, it is I, Skylarin. So the last time I tried to record this, I recorded 23 and 3/4 of a minute, and then the file corrupted, and I was very sad, and I maybe cried, because it didn't just, corrupt, it went, wrong, and somehow all the data was just gone, and the file was just a name that had nothing. And it was terrible. So anyways, hopefully this goes better. Just the struggles today. So I'm a member of a lot of fandoms. A lot of large mainstream fandoms like Star Wars or Marvel, and a lot of less mainstream but equally large fandoms like Ninjago, for example. But the tiniest fandom I am in is basically half a dozen people hyperfixating on the same film. It's actually minuscule, to the point where I've looked into it and there's only 3 or 4 fan fictions, 2 of which were written by the same person. There's only 3 or 4 that I could find, at least. It's a ridiculously small fandom, and it just so happens to be the fandom of my favorite movie of all time, which is Silverado from 1985, written by Lawrence and Mark Kasdan and directed by Lawrence Kasdan. And I think both of them worked on Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back and maybe Return of the Jedi, although I'm not certain about Return of the Jedi. So it's a little interesting for them to have jumped from a sci-fi space opera to Western. But the film is basically a giant love letter to Westerns, and I adore this film. It is, like I said, my favorite film. But it has such a teeny tiny, infinitesimal fan base, it seems. It's like I said, it's a Western, and it's an ensemble cast. There's not just one specific cowboy that the story follows. There's 4. At least that are the main heroes. You have Emmett, Payton, Mal, and Jake in order of introduction. Jake is referenced before we are introduced to Mal, but Mal is introduced before Jake is properly. And it's also told in a not super standard format. It doesn't have what feels like a typical movie act structure. It feels a lot more episodic. It could have also been a TV show, if that makes sense, because the first 30 minutes or so would be the 4 characters all coming together and meeting in Turley, and then the next act would be them going along with the wagon train, helping the wagon train, and then the next act is them coming to town, and the brothers are reuniting with their sister, and Peyton's being welcomed in the saloon, and Mal goes home to find his house burned down and their land overrun with cattle, and finds out that his mom's dead, and just everyone's going home or coming into town, and it's this is happy, this is nice, and then Mal's just yeah, your life sucks now, you're welcome. And I really like that narrative structure, but the reason I'm bringing up this film today is actually I want to start a series of talking about nuanced detail things about it, because I have a lot to talk about this film. There's so much character stuff, there's so much detail stuff, but what I wanted to start with in this theoretical series ranting about this movie is the moral codes that each of these 4 cowboys have. Not that any of them are actually cowboys, as far as I can tell. The only people who might actually be cowboys is Jake and Emmett, but that's because we literally have no idea what they do for a living. Anyways, so the film was made in New Mexico. It was actually filmed from November to January, so you can see breath in the film. You can see people, their breath, the fog, and everyone is freezing all the time, and it's really entertaining because one of the characters, Peyton, spends a good, the first 15 minutes he's in the film wearing only a red union suit. Like, he's in his long underwear. He's in winter. I can only feel bad for Kevin Kline. Thank goodness he committed, though. Anyways, so I wanted to talk about the moral codes that each of these characters have, because they get into a ton of fights in the movie. It's a Western, it's an action film. Fights happen. But curiously, they each seem to have a specific moral code when it comes to the fights that they get into, like the gunfights that they get into. And while all of these characters get along and are friends by the end of the movie, and are like really close by the end, there seems to be some level of moral dissonance between them. Like, there seems to be a lack of overlap between their moral codes, or like they have different morals is what I'm trying to communicate. The most egregious example being Peyton, but there's distinctions and differences between the others as well. And I find that really interesting because each of them has a specific moral code that they stick to throughout the film, and I just want to talk about it. I was going to do like a little series of them, but the first one we're going to start with is Emmett, because the movie opens with him, and we're just going to go chronologically with it. So in Emmett's first scene, in like within the first 5 minutes of the film, he's attacked by 3 men trying to kill him while he was sleeping in a shack somewhere in New Mexico, because he's on his way home from prison because he's been gone for the last 5 years because he killed a guy. So the first of these assailants busts in and is like shooting very blindly. He busts in with, first of all, he's dual wielding, which is not super great for aim. I don't quite know how to articulate why, but it's not great. And also, he went from a highlight environment outside in the morning in New Mexico on like one of the mesas to the inside of the shack that has no light sources except for like some dying embers in the ground, so he can't see. And he's also like running, he's not aiming, he's just running in here and shooting, and he just misses Emmett completely, and then Emmett shoots him and he dies, and then one of the guy's buddies shoots at Emmett through the wall and Emmett shoots him and he dies, and one of the guys shoots through the roof with a shotgun several times, nearly like blasts Emmett's ankle off at one point, but he missed, and Emmett still has his ankle, and Emmett manages to shoot him and he falls through the roof in like a big ol' heap. And those are the first 3 assailants. But the important thing is that Emmett never fires first. Emmett always fires in response to someone else attacking him, because the first guy bursts in and shoots twice, and then Emmett shoots him a bunch, and he is dead, full of lead, and unfortunately can no longer make better choices about how he attacks people to assassinate them, because his choices were poor, which is probably why he's dead. The guy outside shot at Emmett through the wall, and then Emmett shot him, so he shot first. The outside guy shot first, and then the guy on the roof shot with the shotgun, and then Emmett shot him, and so the guy with the shotgun shot first. So Emmett's whole moral code that I'm getting at, my thesis for this video, if you will, is that Emmett's moral code in terms of gunfights is that he will only fight back in self-defense. Lethally in self-defense. So that's the first example. And then like he finds Peyton in the desert and they go to Jameo, and Peyton has a gunfight, but Emmett wasn't involved, so we're ignoring it. And then they get to Turley and there's another gunfight, during which Jake wrecks a staircase. I only assume just because he was either showing off or thought it was funny. I'm not really sure, but he wrecked a staircase, and that's just how Jake is. But Emmett is too... sorry. Emmett is too busy bringing the horses to actually shoot at anybody, and then they're leaving and running, because the only people shooting in that fight that were protagonist side was Jake and Peyton, and Jake ruined the aforementioned staircase. And then they get covering fire from Mal, but Emmett doesn't actually shoot a gun in that sequence. And then we move along, and like the next time he fires a gun is with the wagon train. They encounter the wagon train, whose lockbox has been stolen by their, not tour guides, trail hands. No, they're totally tour guides. Trail hands have stolen the lockbox because they're actually a group of bandits, and so they go to the bandit camp, and Emmett does not fire a gun for most of that entire scene. Also, that scene is wonderful. The face Emmett makes when, like, Mal is pretending to be a posse and shooting at his heels and is, like, super close, and he just looks back at Mal like, are you trying to kill me? The expression on Scott Glenn's face is just so good. Also, I think this is the most energetic we have ever seen Emmett in the entire film. Like, this is the fastest that man ever talks. Because he's usually so slow and, well, not slow, but he's, like, laid back. He's not in a rush, I guess. Also, just a weird, random observation, but we only ever see him drink coffee twice in the film. Once in the opening credits, and once in the scene where he's introduced to Cobb. And we only see him drink whiskey twice. Once when he gets into the saloon in Turley with Peyton, and once at the very end. And I just find that interesting. But at least he likes coffee. So there is that. Anyways, so the only time Emmett fires a gun in this section with the lockbox for the wagon train is when the scout for the bandits had gotten up behind a peak and shot Conrad, who was with them, because Conrad was being stupid and trying to hold them up from leaving. Because Conrad was being stupid. He was a little bit deserving of the bullet, in my opinion, personally. Especially because of how he treated his wife. But that's neither here nor there. So, Emmett shoots the scout guy, as do Peyton and Mal. It's like, you have the one boom, and then you have this chorus of booms in return, and it's like, yeah, that... So, like, Conrad's dead, but the scout is definitely dead. And that was... Notably, Emmett fired that shot after Conrad had been shot, so another shot had been fired first. He does not fire first. So that's 2 scenes, 4 cases, I guess, of him not firing first, waiting for the other person to shoot. Then, like, they get to town, and he doesn't really have a gunfight until the party potluck shindig event at the Settlers' Land, when McKendrick's men come to ruin it, because McKendrick is a big old meanie. And, well, first of all, this is, like, a formal event. It's supposed to be casual, it's supposed to be celebratory, because it's like, yay, the wagon train made it. Most of us didn't die. Looking at Conrad's body. Most of us didn't die. And, notably, Jake is a live wire. Jake is trigger happy. I mentioned he ruined a staircase earlier. Emmett is not, and as I mentioned, he usually does not fire until someone else does. But notably in this scene, Jake is not wearing his guns. We see later in the scene that they had been, like, hung up on a nail in the barn or something. So they're there, but he's not wearing them. Whereas Emmett is wearing his pistol. And you would expect it to be the other way around, because Jake is the live wire. Jake is the trigger happy one. Jake is the one who likes to just shoot the steps out of staircases, because, I don't know, he felt like it that morning. To be fair to him, it is better than hanging. But also, that is just, like, unnecessary property damage. And Jake's a character. I love Jake. But Emmett is the one wearing a gun, and you wouldn't expect that. So the McKendrick's men show up and they're like knocking over the food, and one of them lets out all the pigs, and I think the guy who took the Henry rifle from Mal's dad, I think him specifically, starts just shooting the pigs. Because, you know, they're evil. And yeah, woohoo. So notably, Jake runs and gets his guns as soon as these people show up, and he puts them on and everything, and then he is totally ready to start firing into the bandits, to start shooting at them. But he looks to Emmett first. I can give a whole other chat. It would probably be shorter than this one, but I can give a whole other chat about how much respect Jake has for Emmett. Because you see that in this first scene where he's like kind of embarrassed to tell Emmett because he's like in trouble or whatever. These are two grown men, and Jake is still kind of afraid of being in trouble with his brother. Like, that tells you how far the respect goes. But he looks to Emmett about whether or not they should start firing. And if you pay attention, you can see Emmett like very subtly shake his head. So they hold their fire. You would expect them not to, but they hold their fire until one of the bandits throws a torch at the farmhouse, and one of the settlers, who is actually he if you read the script, which I've read the script because of course I have, because I love this movie, that guy's name was like Brantley or something, and he had come on an earlier wagon train and had settled, and so they were just hanging out at his place because they hadn't built their houses and whatnot yet. So anyways, he has a shotgun, and he shoots the torch out of the air, and then he turns to one of the bandits, but before he can get the shot off, the bandit shoots him. And I'm pretty sure it's the guy with the Henry rifle, because then Emmett opens fire. It's only after the civilian has been shot that Emmett opens fire, but then he shoots that guy, and I'm pretty sure that's how he ends up with that rifle for later in the film, and it honestly, that legit saves his life later, but that's not relevant to the thesis of the video. My point is, it is only after the civilian has been shot that Emmett starts returning fire, which sounds suspiciously similar to in the Lockbox Bandit Canyon scenario, where it was only after Conrad, who was arguably a civilian, had been shot that Emmett actually fired his gun at the bandits. Admittedly into the one scout, but still, like, he waits until the shot is fired. The next fight that Emmett is in is when he gets jumped by Cobbsmen and run over with a horse, but he's out of ammo because he was target practicing, and then they jumped him, and also they ran him over with a horse, so it's not particularly relevant to my thesis, and we're just gonna ignore it. Although I will comment, there is no way he got kicked in the demonstrably kicked in the side and kicked in the head by that horse, and did not kicked in the head to the point the hoof cut his forehead. He was bleeding. He definitely had at least 2 or 3 broken ribs from getting kicked in the side. Miraculously, he didn't have a punctured lung or like kidney or whatever. But he also definitely has a concussion. And just, you gotta keep that in mind for later in the film when he's like yeeting himself through a window, and it's literally at most 12 hours later, probably. Like, well, not 12 hours, more like it is less than 24 hours after he's had his ribs broken and his head nearly kicked in, and he is throwing himself through windows. Like, I get that Emmett is too mad to really care about his injuries, but sir, this is unwise. Anyways, so his next fight is the stampede on the ranch, where he and Peyton lead a stampede of cattle into McKendrick's ranch, and Scruffy is an idiot and runs at it. Yeah, so, fun fact, I know, like, most of the henchmen's name, the henchmen of the various characters by name, and some of their personalities, and, Scruffy is the most memorable because Scruffy is, frankly, the most annoying and also dumb. Also, he is the one who advocated for child murder. So, Gotta love Scruffy. We're gonna move on. So the stampede comes down and like Mal was sniping or whatever and very nearly shot McKendrick in the face, but McKendrick ducked, unfortunately. Big sad. Granted, he did take a horse to the face later. So during that fight, I don't remember who fired first between Peyton and Emmett and the cowhands at the farm, or like if they were directly firing at the cowhands when they crested the hill, if they were firing first, or if they were just firing to scare the cow. I don't know. I'm gonna just ignore that entire section because that was just straight up all out gunfight, which is not really to my thesis, because my thesis is more like one-on-one fights. So Emmett goes inside to rescue his nephew, who is kidnapped because McKendrick, because Scruffy was advocating for child murder, and McKendrick was like, no, please let us not murder the child. A better idea, let's just kidnap him. Because, you know, that's infinitely better than child murder. Which, like, it is, but also, like, you're still kidnapping a child. It really got to a point in this movie where McKendrick couldn't do anything and still be in the right. Actually, no, I think that's the opening of this movie. Kendrick's just in the wrong, though. McKendrick is not a great person. The only redeeming character trait that he has is that he disagrees with child murder. He doesn't want to shoot Augie in the face, or he doesn't let Scruffy shoot Augie in the face. Otherwise, he's just a coward and a bully, and he's fairly useless and absolutely hilariously terrified of Emmett. So there's extra scenes in the original script, but in the film, he runs into Emmett in the street, and like, you can see the panic set in his face, especially once he realizes Emmett has now figured out that those men who tried to kill them in the opening were sent by McKendrick. And the very next scene is McKendrick going to Cobb and being like, please assassinate Emmett. And Cobb being like, well, he must be pretty good if he's got you scared. And McKendrick's like, yeah, your guys are gonna have to kill him because he is too awesome and, like, good at fighting for my men to kill him. Either that or his men are just incompetent, and considering Scruffy is one of his men, I think it's the latter, but, like, he's just so scared of him, and I think that's the funniest thing. Anyways, so Emmett, that is, goes into McKendrick's house to try and rescue his nephew, and there's two people he fights in there. He goes in, and the first guy is at the top of the stairs, and Emmett comes in, is like near the bottom of the stairs, and the guy goes to shoot him, and Emmett, with his broken ribs, and his like severe concussion, if not skull fracture, throws himself down at the foot of the stairs to avoid getting shot, and the guy like misses and hits the little knob at the end of the banister, and it like explodes in a puff of splinters, and Emmett shoots him, and he falls down the stairs, and like, oh no, he dead. And Emmett goes up the stairs to try and find his nephew. And then so throughout the movie, the cowhands have been like pretty consistently present, at least as soon as they got to Silverado. Like, you keep seeing them in the background. The same for Cobb's deputies. But the like creepy looking, like pilgrim looking nanny guy that was watching Augie only shows up at the start of the ranch raid scene, and he's like dressed all in black and wears this pilgrim looking hat minus the belt buckle, and just like is weirdly androgynous, but not in a like wayfish way, like in you can't tell if it's Matilda's dad or the Trunchbull. Like, I don't know, I just don't like him. I find him unsettling. Anyways, so he fires off at Emmett a lot, and Emmett goes, and he like locks him and Augie in one bedroom, and Emmett goes through a different door and then throws himself through the window because, you know, he has broken ribs and a concussion and everything. Like, and it's not me being like, oh, he probably has broken ribs because yada yada, and like he was winded. It's like, we can tell he has broken ribs when he and Mal saddle up. You can, like, you can see there is pain there. There is pain there. And Mal notices too. But he doesn't get to say anything because Emmett is just, like, Emmett's expression changes. He's just too angry. Like, he knows he's in pain. He knows his ribs are broken. He's just too angry to care. He's way too angry to care. But even though he's too angry to care, he does have broken ribs. He is concussed because he got kicked in the head by a horse so hard that the hoof cut his face. And he has thrown himself down at a staircase and thrown himself through a window. So at the end of the film, it cuts from like the last kill to the denouement moment where like they're having a toast, and then almost immediately after, Mal and his sister leave, and then Emmett and Jake leave, and it's like, how quickly did this happen? Because, first of all, Peyton has become sheriff, and I am under the impression that that is not a quick process. But second of all, there is no way for Emmett to be walking. Like, I mean, sure, he has, like, a little bit of a limp. But, he had broken ribs, he had a severe concussion, he got shot in the leg. Also, he yeeted himself through a window, and he yeeted himself down at the bottom of the stairs with broken ribs and a concussion. Like, I am convinced that after he yeeted his horse into McKendrick face first, and like went and got Augie from the graveyard that they left him in, because, you know, that's... No, sorry, they didn't actually leave him at the graveyard. From the, like, little bluff that they left him at. I am convinced he just passed out and fell off his horse. There's no way he was walking. He would be down for, like, a week after sustaining those injuries. And with that severity, like... Yeah, no, he wasn't able to walk. But anyways, so he manages to shoot the weird-looking pilgrim nanny guy that I don't like, and rescues Augie from McKendrick's house. And, notably, the guy on the staircase who fell down the stairs fired first and blew off that knob at the end of the banister, like I said, before Emmett shot him, and then the weird-looking nanny guy... No, he didn't get a shot off when Emmett threw himself through the window. I mean, he actually might have, but I don't remember distinctly enough. But he did fire at Emmett earlier than that. And also, he has Emmett's nephew. So, that means, in the opening scene, Emmett waits for the three attackers, the three assassins McKendrick sent, individually to fire first before he shoots them. In the, lockbox retrieval, when Conrad's shot, it is only after Conrad's shot that he returns fire, and then at the potluck, it is only after Brantley is shot that he returns fire, and then in the raid at the ranch, it is only after the two people try to kill him that he returns fire. So, like, very consistently does Emmett not shoot first. This is a very consistent trait. And then even during his final fight with McKendrick gets the first shot off when he spots Emmett riding through town, and then takes like a whole minute to try and aim with his rifle while his horse is sitting stock still, and even then Emmett somehow senses this and like turns, and McKendrick misses the frickin' shot because, you know, he's bad at everything, he's a terrible person. His only redeeming character trait is that he doesn't advocate child murder, and just like to top it all off, he can't shoot worth a darn. Which might be why he's so afraid of Emmett, because Emmett can do this thing called aiming. I'm sorry, just McKendrick is... It's not that I hate the character, it's just one of those characters where it's like the mimetic song, you know, you tried your best but you don't succeed. Like, that's just his theme song, apparently. He's been struggling real hard. It's kind of pathetic. Anyways, so McKendrick fires first, and then Emmett kills him with a horse to the face. Which, my favorite final boss fight in that entire sequence, because it has each of them fight their little boss person individually. My favorite fight was 100% Emmett threw a horse in someone's face. Because, like, McKendrick knew Emmett was dangerous, but I think he was much more concerned about Emmett's ability to shoot rather than Emmett's ability to ride horses so well that they will yeet themselves out of a barn and into someone's face. Because he was not expecting the entirety of an equine directly into his cranium. Emmett over here doing vehicular manslaughter before it was cool, and I dig it so much. It's so funny. And so good. And just the sheer surprise on McKendrick's face as he takes a mouthful of hooves and, like, you know what? He just takes a mouthful of horse. It's not only the feet. He takes the entire horse to the face. The entire horse. Best death in this entire movie. Best death. So, consistent thing throughout the film, Emmett fires... He waits for someone else to shoot. He literally let a civilian get shot before he fired back in the potluck settlers event that was wrecked by McKendrick's men. So, like, we've established his moral code. It's pretty clear. He waits for the other person to fire. He only shoots in self-defense or defense of himself and others. It's only after someone else has shot. And, however, I think there was a time where he broke this rule. Because if you pay attention to the backstory that's established for Emmett, as for, like, why he was in prison for 10 years, or, like, why McKendrick keeps trying to murder him literally the entire film, well, you learn through dialogue between, like, Emmett and Peyton, or Emmett and his sister, which the conversation between him and his sister was so fun to me, because, like, her husband, JT, mentions that Emmett, like, offhandedly, that Emmett killed McKendrick's father, Murdo, or Ethan McKendrick's father, Murdo McKendrick, and Kate's like, no, don't say that in front of our son, Emmett killed nobody, and Emmett's like, yeah, I did kill a dude. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it for your son. I don't care about your wishes for your son. I did kill a dude. So, yeah, I killed a man. It's just funny to me. And so that scene, it just kind of establishes very clearly that he did in fact kill that man. But the really pivotal scene for my argument that he has broken this code before is when he and Cobb are introduced to each other by Peyton, which is a fantastic scene, because it starts and, like, Peyton introduces those two, and then Cobb just starts drinking Peyton's coffee. I have such many thoughts about Cobb, especially in regards to that scene, but, like, he just starts drinking Peyton's coffee like it ain't no thing. It's so funny, and they never comment on it. Anyways, so in that scene, Peyton introduces them, and Cobb initially recognizes Emmett, not in the sense of, like, knows him, but as in, like, figures out who he is in relation to others by being like, oh, you're Kate's brother, because, you know, Kate is Emmett's sister, and she's well known in town because her husband has a land office, which is why McKendrick freaking burns it down, because it had all the deeds and stuff, and he was just trying to claim it. Anyways. And then the second thing he says about Emmett is, you must be the one who killed old Murdo McKendrick. And Emmett just, like, his entire demeanor shifts. He sinks into a chair a little. He just looks at, like his mood just falls. He looks, like, ashamed almost. And his voice gets even softer than it usually is, which is impressive. And he just sort of quietly says, well, I didn't have much choice. He was about to shoot my brother in the back. And then Cobb, of course, is flippant, and I have so many opinions about Cobb in the scene, and how he throws Emmett's words back in his face, and, like, what this means for Cobb as a character, and, like, how he relates to other people. But that's a video for another day. And you can tell from how Emmett answers the question that, he is far from proud about killing Murdo. Like, it's not something he's proud about, it's not something he revels in. Like, he's a little bit ashamed. And I think the reason is all of these other situations where Emmett seems perfectly fine and comfortable in killing other people is because they shot first. And so in his mind, the action of shooting them in turn is justified. Because it is self-defense, because they fired first. But what I think happened with Murdo McKendrick is, like, yeah, he may have been about to shoot Jake in the back. He, like, had his gun aimed at him, whatever. But no shots were fired until Emmett pulled the trigger. Emmett shot first. And it's bothering him. It's like he's having trouble reconciling with it. He's having trouble justifying his actions a little bit. Like, what's done is done. He can't bring Murdo back from the dead, nor would he probably want to. And McKendrick clearly has a grudge against him for killing his dad and everything, and, like, Emmett knows that he did it to protect his brother, and he knows that he did, like, protect his brother. He did save his brother Jake from getting shot in the back. Which, speaking of which, there's, like, a whole thing about Jake almost getting shot in the back, and I have questions. That's a rant for another day, though. And, so, but he knows that he protected his brother, he knows he saved his brother, but that's the first time, probably, that he's shot someone first, and it goes against what he kind of stands for. Like, it goes against this moral code that he has stuck to the entire film. So it really bothers him, and he struggles to justify his actions to himself. And I think that's part of why he doesn't seem to mind having served time for it. Because, like, he spent 5 years at Leavenworth. That's established in, like, the first conversation he has with Peyton. He spent 5 years there, and he doesn't seem too miffed about having spent time in prison. I assume it wasn't a pleasant experience, because this is 1880, and, like, nothing was a pleasant experience in that time period. But he doesn't seem too miffed about it. Like, he seems to feel like he deserved to serve time for it, which would make sense, because he feels very guilty about having fired first, and not in, like, oh, I've murdered an innocent man, but a lot more like, how do I know for certain he was going to kill Jake if he never fired, you know? And so he doesn't see, like, when he talks to McKendrick and they make reference to him serving time, he doesn't seem to be upset that he served time, just, he's trying to, goodness, that scene between them is so good. Because, like, McKendrick's just kind of going about his day being very tired, because he's probably sleep deprived, and then he runs into Emmett, and just, that is the most casually threatening I have seen anyone, like, ever, is Emmett in that scene, because, like, you know, he's saying these things, I mean, they can be interpreted casually, but, like, there's this thread to his voice that is 100%, I will shoot you. And like, McKendrick's just terrified of him the whole time. It's just so great. But my point is, he doesn't seem miffed about actually, like, serving time. What he seems upset about is that McKendrick is still holding a grudge because that man is a coward and a bully and, like, a spoiled brat and just can't let go of crap. McKendrick is a disappointment of a person. I mean, I can't say most villains are. A lot of villains are actually quite charismatic, like Cobb, for example, but McKendrick is just a failure. In so many ways. Anyways, so, the thesis today was that Emmett's moral code when it comes to his gunfights is that he has to wait for the other person to shoot. The other person has to shoot first, and he can only really fire back in self-defense or in defense of himself and others. And the one time he broke this code, he's still struggling to justify his actions to himself to this day, and it was to save his brother's life. So, that was a lot longer than I anticipated it to be, but it was a very fun ramble. I'm probably going to continue making videos about this film because it is my favorite film and so underrated and underknown, or not well known when it should be. So that was the first part of the moral codes of gunfighters bit, and I'll continue with the next person, Peyton, whenever I have the time to record. Really. So, yeah, that's it. Farewell!